social criticism is of course an element in my work, but the most important thing to me as an artist is not to be didactic, but simply descriptive, rather than prescriptive. I mean, I don't have any kinds of answers for these kinds of things. I'm not running for political office. I'm, a lot of things involved in this that, and yet at the same time, I feel totally free as an artist to use whatever kind of situation is going on. But the main point is I want to create a situation which is free enough and sort of airy enough so that people can, when presented with these descriptive situations, make up their own minds. And I try to pace the work so that it gives people a chance to do that, to kind of go, that's not right, or, well, that's interesting, I'll think about that later, so that there's not a sense of barrage.
It's almost an analogy to the way in which the process of information being conveyed anyway. I mean, you're taking the same information, but you're actually placing it in a different kind of order or in a different light. With the missile thing, those missiles are there and they're described as being there for particular reasons, but if they're presented in a different way, they suddenly become not acceptable, or at least one should think again about them.
Well, it's hard to think of a situation in which information is presented with total neutrality. First of all, I mean, when you're presented with what's called your news in your country, it is not non-filtered, it is heavily filtered news. And so that when I use my own filters to present information, I don't consider them any more or less tilted than the kinds of information that is available, so that I don't feel that I'm out of bounds, putting it into my own structures.
This brings up sort of how the artist can actually intervene in a cultural sense with his or her work, which is, I guess, something that is uppermost on a lot of people's minds at the moment. But with this work now, it's obviously going to sort of be seen by an enormous number of people, and obviously through the record, people are going to be drawn into that. Does that sort of alter the way in which you think about the work and so on, or not?
It's really been my hope. I mean, first of all, the United States as a country is absolutely AM pop culture, period. And the audiences that go to different kinds of events in the United States are very distinct. People who go to rock and roll concerts wouldn't be caught dead at a downtown theater work, or vice versa. To some extent, that's loosening up. But my hope has been for American artists in particular to decide to possibly enter their own culture. That of course the art scene is off somewhere else with the art magazines and the universities and the museums and things like this, and quite isolated. And I think on the one hand that's really quite wonderful, because then you can go to a building and it's a depository for luxury items, and you can go and you can stare at a giant blue surface for 5 hours and no one's gonna, it's absolute freedom, and it means what you want it to mean, or whatever, or it can mean nothing. And or you can be a specialist and think of the development of blue through the history of art, or you can look at it any way you choose. For some kinds of art, these museum depositories are not practical, and that networks seem to be practical, networks of radio and television and things like that. And I think it would be incredibly exciting if artists decided to use those networks and just see what happened. Yeah. And that there's so much of kind of snobbish attitude towards that kind of culture that artists naturally pull away from it and just go, I am not going to dilute my work by doing that. And I certainly wouldn't want to suggest that anyone dilute their work for anything. It's might as well not bother doing it if that's the attitude. But I think that if artists could learn to use those systems, it would really be quite amazing.
As appropriate ways in which ideas can be disseminated in an appropriate form, whereas one can imagine there's no way that, for instance, what you're doing here could be fixed in time in a gallery, so that the gallery becomes, or museum becomes, completely inappropriate for housing or disseminating what you have to say as an artist. Do you think that this is going to happen now? I mean, is there more and more movement in that direction in terms of the way artists are working in the States? I mean, New York, perhaps that's difficult to say. I mean, obviously it's the way in which you're working towards.
I think it's a distinct possibility. There's a new museum that's going to open in Los Angeles, headed up by Pontus Hultén, and a lot of the plans for that include electronics and include working with TV. And this could be, of course, an enormous failure, and it could be an enormous success. It depends on how carefully it's worked on, so that the art does not become. It's a dangerous situation, to say the least, because what happens, of course, with any kind of conglomerate is that things get really watered down, and anything that's threatening to that conglomerate will not be aired, period. And so that it's a question of its power situation in which if enough people want that kind of idea aired, it will be aired. And, of course, with the channel situation of cable TV, more and more artists are interested and have an opportunity to do that kind of work. And I think it could work very, very well, I think. It's kind of impossible to guess at the moment what's actually going to happen. But I think that one very important thing about this at the moment is that, and there is a lot of resistance, and to some degree by artists, that this is not the thing to do, and the only reaction I have to that is it always has seemed to me that the most wonderful thing about being an artist is you are absolutely free. That it's the only thing really in which you can make up your own rules for yourself. But for an artist to make up rules for art or for other artists is an absolute contradiction. And to say art should only be like this and should only be given like this and it should look like this. I mean, that's crazy, because it's it is a blatant contradiction to, I think, what is a situation of total freedom.
Artists sort of entering the media in the way that you've just been talking about. Perhaps there's a danger there where the artist actually then has to conform to a kind of structure that isn't or may not be appropriate, and hence just wouldn't work. I mean, it would work if the artist had a complete kind of freedom to actually rework that media and do precisely what they want to do and not become a kind of a cameo slot, like now we have the culture.
That's exactly what happened to me a few years ago. I was asked by NBC to do a little special, mostly because they had some money that they were forced into doing these cultural specials, and it was exactly that. It came on right after the farm report in the morning. Well, hog futures are up 55, and now for the art, and it was horrifying because I was absolutely in a position of being the talent. I had nothing really to do with how it was being shot, how it was being thought about. I was just asked to come on and play the violin and do this or that at the appropriate moment. Now, I fortunately was able to get out of that as soon as I saw what the situation was and realized this is a big mistake, because it's much worse than not trying to do this at all, to become absolutely co-opted by the system in this way. And I decided I will never do this again unless I have unless I'm in a situation of being basically the director, or working with other artists who are director, producer of the show, because otherwise you're just going to be some kind of soap that's being sold. And so I decided to wait until that was that was more possible, and to work very carefully in those terms, because I really feel that that's much worse than not doing it at all.
Yeah. Finally, I understand that you've become involved with the work of Burroughs. I wondered, what particular things interest you about Burroughs, and where do you think that's leading?
Well, first of all, I mean, he's one of my absolute favorite artists and writers, and first really became aware of his work not until really 1978. I mean, I'd read things like Naked Lunch and that kind of thing. Then I was one of the Master of Ceremonies for a 3-day celebration in New York of his work called the Nova Convention. And the thing about Burroughs is really that he is incredibly, first of all, funny, and second, precise. And that combination to me is perfect. He's also taken one aspect, let's say, of culture, medicine, which is he kind of concentrates on, and looks at that, and out of that, you'd think at first limited aspect, he is able to analyze all sorts of things within the culture. In one of his more recent works, Blade Runner, this is a wonderful, sort of written as a screenplay, set in the future, as most of his work is, in a future in which medical care is so expensive that no one can afford it. And so that if you're a doctor and you're found with surgical instruments, you're immediately arrested. And so all of the actual operations are performed secretly in the New York subway system. And the people who have the surgical instruments are these kids who go up and down on the trains with bags full of surgical instruments, and these are the Blade Runners. They deliver them to the doctors who then perform the operations. But one of the amazing things about the way Burroughs describes this situation of literally underground activity is that he takes the situation of someone is in pain, and how does their own culture react to that situation, and then he becomes it spreads. I mean, and a lot of the way he describes things, of course, are about that kind of contagion. In any case, one of his most well-known bon mots is "language is a virus from outer space," and of course, this language as a kind of contagious disease, a kind of like spread by the mouth. That's quite a strange thing for someone who's used billions of words and written lots and lots of books to say that language is a virus. But at the same time, it's a wonderful sort of tension in his work that the inaccuracies of language can be used somehow to describe what you could call maybe reality. I mean, one of the latest things he's been working on, which eventually results in a book, is really a spoken book. He wrote it. He worked on it, let's say, through speaking it, and you feel those rhythms within it as well. A couple of weeks ago, did some concerts with William Burroughs and John Chernow in San Francisco and L.A., and I got the feeling, it was funny that we were on a very ancient American circuit, which is the vaudeville circuit, and one that Mark Twain was also on, and I kept thinking of Mark Twain when I was hearing William Burroughs reading, because they're both such hams, first of all, and such wonderful, not even readers, but sort of proclaimers, because their voices are incredibly important in terms of, once you hear their voice, and after you read their books again, and you hear it always, their voice speaking the words. It's not words on a page anymore.